Hey everyone, and welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving into a period that's had a massive impact on how we see the world today, the Renaissance. If you're loving these deep dives and want more, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a single one. Now back to the Renaissance. We're talking art, architecture, philosophy, even how we see ourselves as individuals. It's amazing how much of what we consider modern actually started way back in 14th century Florence. We all know the Renaissance was this incredible period of rebirth in Europe, but was it really a clean break from the past? Or were there deeper continuities at play? Let's unpack that together.
That's a fascinating question. And, it really gets to the heart of what the Renaissance was all about. It wasn't just about bringing back togas and building fancy domes. It was a profound shift in how people thought about the world and their place in it.
So, coming out of the Middle Ages, what exactly was being reborn?
Well, one key aspect was a rediscovery of ancient Greek and Roman ideas. But it wasn't just about admiring their statues and copying their architecture. It was about engaging with their philosophy, their politics, their whole way of life. And these classical texts weren't seen as just ancient history. They were a source of inspiration for how to live a good life right here, right now.
That's amazing. Imagine if those ideas had been lost forever. We might be living in a very different world.
It's mind-boggling to think about, isn't it? And it's important to acknowledge the role of Islamic scholars in all of this. They preserved many of these classical texts during the Middle Ages, playing a crucial role in making the Renaissance possible. It's a powerful reminder of how interconnected history really is.
It really is. So, we have this amazing cultural and intellectual shift happening. But why Italy? Why did the Renaissance begin there in the 14th century? What was so special about that time and place?
Italy, especially cities like Florence and Venice, had a unique set of conditions that made it the perfect incubator for this cultural revolution. For one thing, feudalism was on the decline, leading to the rise of powerful city-states. And with that came a thriving merchant class and a newfound appreciation for individual achievement.
So it's not just about pretty paintings and sculptures. It sounds like there were some serious economic forces at play as well.
Absolutely. The growth of industries like mining and textiles created new wealth, leading to the rise of powerful families like the Medici in Florence. They weren't just bankers, they were patrons of the arts, using their wealth to commission incredible works of art and architecture.
So it sounds like art wasn't just for aesthetics. It was a way to display power and influence.
Exactly. Art became a way to showcase wealth, to demonstrate one's sophistication,
Hmm.
and to leave a lasting legacy. And that drive to impress led to some of the most breathtaking artistic innovations in human history.
It's interesting how economics and art were so intertwined during this period. But what about the average person? What was daily life like for those who weren't part of the elite?
Well, society was still very much family centric. Marriages were often arranged for economic and social advantage, solidifying alliances and business ties. And while humanism and secularism were growing, this all happened within a Christian context. People didn't just abandon their faith.
So it was more of a shift in emphasis, a recognition of human potential alongside religious devotion.
Exactly. The idea of free will became really important. The belief that humans had the power to shape their own destinies, to strive for greatness in this life. This was a radical departure from the medieval mindset.
Speaking of radical departures, let's talk about the political landscape. All these powerful city-states jostling for position. It sounds like a recipe for conflict.
It certainly was. There were constant power struggles, alliances, betrayals. It was like a real life Game of Thrones. The Italian city-states were constantly maneuvering for advantage, trying to outsmart and overpower their rivals.
You mentioned Florence and Venice. Were there any other major players in this political chess match?
Oh, absolutely. Milan, Naples, the Papal States, they were all vying for control. And this constant competition led to some interesting developments in diplomacy. For instance, the Peace of Lodi in 1454 was a landmark attempt to establish a balance of power between the major city-states.
So they recognized that some level of stability was even amidst all the rivalry.
Precisely. And it's in this context of shifting alliances and power struggles that we see the emergence of a figure like Niccolo Machiavelli and his infamous book, The Prince.
Ah, Machiavelli, the ultimate political realist. Didn't he advocate for a rather ruthless approach to leadership?
He did indeed. The Prince is a fascinating and often disturbing look at the realities of power. Machiavelli argued that a ruler shouldn't be afraid to use deception, manipulation, even violence to achieve their goals and maintain order. It was a pretty shocking departure from the traditional, more idealistic views of leadership.
It really makes you think about the moral compromises that might have been made in the pursuit of power during this era.
It certainly does. And whether or not rulers actually followed Machiavelli's advice is still debated by historians today. But there's no denying that his work reflects the complex and often cutthroat realities of Renaissance politics.
So we have this backdrop of political intrigue,
Hmm.
but at the same time, this incredible explosion of artistic creativity. It seems like these two worlds were constantly colliding during the Renaissance.
They were, and one of the most striking features of Renaissance art is the rise of portraiture. This wasn't just about capturing a likeness, it was about celebrating the individual, showcasing their achievements, their personality, their unique place in the world.
Which makes sense, considering the growing emphasis on individual achievement that we talked about earlier. And of course, we can't forget about the Renaissance's fascination with the human form, including nudes.
Absolutely. Renaissance artists were captivated by the beauty and complexity of the human body, and they weren't afraid to depict it in all its glory, breaking free from the more stylized and symbolic representations of the medieval period.
It was a bold statement, a celebration of human potential and the physical world. And speaking of bold statements, let's talk about some of the giants of Renaissance art. Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, Raphael, they weren't just painting pretty pictures, they're pushing the boundaries of what art could be.
They were true masters who revolutionized painting and sculpture. Think about the realism of Leonardo's Mona Lisa, the incredible power of Michelangelo's David, the breathtaking beauty of Raphael's Madonnas. They weren't simply copying the ancients, they were innovating, experimenting with new techniques, and pushing the boundaries of perspective and realism.
And they weren't afraid to tackle a wider range of subjects, right? Moving beyond purely religious themes to explore mythology, history, and the human experience in all its complexity.
Exactly. They were reflecting the expanding intellectual horizons of the Renaissance, embracing a wider range of human experience, and exploring new ways of seeing the world. And it wasn't just painting and sculpture that flourished during the Renaissance. Architecture also experienced a revival, drawing inspiration from Roman styles to create breathtaking buildings that still stand today.
You're right. I'm thinking of structures like Brunellesi's dome on the Florence Cathedral. Such an engineering marvel for its time. And it wasn't just about replicating the past. Renaissance architects were innovating, experimenting with new forms and techniques.
Absolutely. And while we're on the topic of artistic innovation, it's worth noting the fascinating differences between Italian Renaissance art and what was happening in Northern Europe.
Yes, the Northern Renaissance had a distinct character, didn't it? What were some of the key differences in their approach?
Well, in Italy, fresco painting, murals painted on wet plaster, was the dominant technique. It allowed for large scale works that adorned the walls of palaces and churches. But in Northern Europe, oil painting was gaining popularity, leading to a different aesthetic.
Didn't oil painting allow for greater detail and a richer, more luminous quality?
Exactly. It enabled artists like Jan van Eyck to achieve an incredible level of detail and realism in their works. You can practically see every hair and wrinkle in their portraits.
It's amazing how different artistic traditions developed even within the same broader movement.
Yeah.
And as the Renaissance progressed, we saw the emergence of mannerism, a style that seemed to deliberately break with the balance and harmony of the High Renaissance.
Yes. Mannerism was a fascinating development. It involved distorting figures, playing with perspective, and creating a sense of unease or tension in the artwork. Some see it as a reflection of the growing anxieties and uncertainties of the late Renaissance period.
It's like they were intentionally challenging the conventions of beauty and harmony. And speaking of challenging conventions, let's move on to the realm of education and philosophy. The Renaissance wasn't just about art and architecture, was it? It was about a fundamental shift in how people thought about the world and their place in it.
It was a time of immense intellectual ferment. Humanism, the idea of studying classical texts, not just for their religious significance, but for their insights into human nature and the good life, was at the heart of this shift.
So it wasn't just about rote memorization of facts, it was about using knowledge to cultivate moral character and civic virtue.
Precisely. Thinkers like Petrarch and Lorenzo Valla weren't just passively reading ancient texts, they were critically analyzing them, challenging traditional interpretations, and paving the way for a more questioning and analytical approach to knowledge.
Just like they were rediscovering the power of critical thinking, the importance of challenging assumptions and seeking evidence.
Exactly. And this led to some fascinating philosophical developments. For example, Marsilio Ficino and Pico della Mirandola explored ideas like Hermeticism, which drew on ancient Egyptian and Greek mystical traditions and emphasized the divine potential within each human being.
Hermeticism. That sounds intriguing. What were some of its core beliefs, and why did it appeal to Renaissance thinkers?
Hermeticism proposed a view of the universe as interconnected and infused with divine energy. Humans, according to this view, had the potential to tap into this divine energy and achieve spiritual enlightenment and even magical powers. It resonated with the Renaissance emphasis on human potential and the quest for knowledge.
It's amazing how they were weaving together different strands of thought, ancient and modern,
Yeah.
to create a new intellectual tapestry. And we can't talk about the Renaissance without acknowledging the role of the church, especially the papacy. It's a bit ironic, isn't it? The popes were major patrons of the arts, but at the same time, their moral authority was declining.
It is an interesting paradox, isn't it? On the one hand, you have popes like Julius II and Leo X commissioning grand works of art and architecture, showcasing the church's wealth and power. But on the other hand, the church was facing growing criticism for its corruption, worldliness, and abuse of power.
And then there's the issue of nepotism. Popes using their position to advance the interests of their families, often at the expense of the church's spiritual mission.
Yes, nepotism was rampant within the church hierarchy, adding fuel to the fire of criticism. It's a reminder that the Renaissance, for all its achievements, was not a utopia. Power struggles and corruption were very much a part of the reality of the time.
It's important to acknowledge those complexities, right? To see the Renaissance in all its shades of light and shadow. But despite these challenges, humanist ideas continued to spread throughout Europe, largely thanks to a revolutionary invention, Gutenberg's printing press.
Ah, the printing press. Talk about a game changer. It's hard to overstate the impact this invention had on the spread of knowledge, literacy, and new ideas.
It's like the internet of its day, democratizing access to information and challenging traditional hierarchies of knowledge.
Exactly. Suddenly, books and pamphlets could be produced on a much larger scale, making them more affordable and accessible to a wider audience. This led to a surge in literacy rates and a blossoming of intellectual debate.
And weren't there specific books that had a particularly profound impact during this time? Books that really captured the spirit of the Renaissance?
Absolutely. Thomas More's Utopia, for example, imagined an ideal society based on reason, justice, and equality. It sparked debate about the nature of the good society and the role of government. And then there was Erasmus, a Dutch humanist, who published critical editions of the Bible and other religious texts, advocating for reform within the church. His works had a huge impact on the growing religious debates of the time.
It's fascinating how the printing press allowed these ideas to travel across borders, connecting thinkers and sparking debates throughout Europe. And speaking of influential thinkers, we can't forget about William Shakespeare, a playwright who truly embodied the spirit of the Renaissance.
Shakespeare, now we're talking. His plays are still performed and studied all over the world centuries after they were written. What makes his work so relevant to the Renaissance?
Well, for one thing, he drew heavily on classical themes and stories, reimagining them for a Renaissance audience. But he also explored timeless human themes: love, ambition, betrayal, the nature of power, the struggle for justice. His characters are so complex and relatable, even across the century.
Exactly. And his language. Shakespeare had an incredible gift for words, creating memorable phrases and speeches that have become part of our everyday language.
To be or not to be, that is the question.
Uh-huh.
I mean, come on, that's pure genius.
It is. And think about his history plays like Richard III and Henry V. They reflect the Renaissance fascination with power and leadership, exploring the complexities of ambition and the corrupting influence of power.
It's like he was holding a mirror up to his own society, revealing its triumphs and its flaws, its aspirations and its anxieties.
He was. And in doing so, he created works that continue to resonate with audiences today, reminding us of the enduring power of human storytelling and the timeless nature of human experience.
So we've journeyed through the art, the politics, the philosophy, even touched on the technology of the Renaissance. What a whirlwind.
Mm.
But as we wrap up, I can't help but wonder, what is the lasting legacy of this era? How much did the Renaissance really shape the world we live in today?
It's a question worth pondering, isn't it? And I think the answer is more than we might realize. So many of the values we consider fundamental today, individualism, human potential, the pursuit of knowledge, critical thinking, these all have roots in the Renaissance.
It's like they planted the seeds for the Enlightenment, the scientific revolution, even the modern emphasis on human rights and individual freedom.
Exactly, it's all interconnected. The Renaissance challenged traditional hierarchies, encouraged a spirit of inquiry and innovation, and sparked a passion for knowledge and exploration that continues to drive us forward today.
It also left us with an incredible artistic legacy. Masterpieces that continue to inspire awe and wonder centuries later. And beyond the art itself, the Renaissance reminds us of the power of human creativity, the importance of pushing boundaries, and the enduring allure of beauty, and excellence.
It's a testament to what humans can achieve when they dare to dream big, to question the status quo, and to embrace new ways of thinking and seeing the world.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time for us to emerge from our deep dive into the Renaissance. But remember, this is just the beginning of the exploration. There's so much more to discover about this fascinating period.
There truly is. History is a vast and endlessly fascinating landscape, waiting to be explored.
So, to our listeners, we leave you with this. How do the values of the Renaissance, individualism, human potential, critical thinking, resonate with you today? What can we learn from this era as we navigate the complexities of our own time? We encourage you to continue pondering these questions and keep diving deep into the rich tapestry of history. And before we go, if you enjoyed this deep dive and want more insightful explorations of history, science, and culture, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any future episodes. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those questions coming.